While we typically try to keep our episodes light, today we will be discussing sensitive topics. Please be mindful of your own personal limitations and use your best judgment. You are welcome to skip ahead or skip this episode entirely, but whatever you choose, please do what is best for you. Welcome to the Therapist Uncut podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young, Jolene Daly, and Alyssa Nahara.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Therapist Uncut. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Officer Michael Shaw, a 12-year veteran of a local police department. Michael had reached out to us to share his story about his experience with suicide and PTSD. And his experience was tragic, and he'd like to share it with us because he really recognizes the impact of trauma on first responders and those struggling with thoughts of self-harm. Welcome, Michael.
All right. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for being here with us today.
So, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your story, what you do currently?
So I am currently a police officer assigned to patrol. I've been with this agency as a police officer now for about 2 years. And then my previous agency, I was there a total of about 10 years. And in that time, I started kind of as a reserve police officer, and then it evolved into a full-time, and then I became a field training officer, and then also like a supervisor.
So you've got extensive experience. You've seen a lot, you've heard a lot, but one personal story in particular has really stuck with you and become a passion of yours to share with not just the community, but with just society at large.
So prior to being a police officer, so it was back in 2006. I was 3 guys living in a house. We were roommates, and one of my best friends was actually living there. He was a deputy. And at this time, I was an animal control officer, wasn't still pursuing my dream of being a police officer. And, I didn't have a lot of training, so I didn't really know what mental health issues were. And I can remember here's 3 guys in our early 20s. And so in this time, I guess, living the bachelor life, if you will, there was, I wouldn't say partying, but definitely there was drinking going on and doing a lot of just hanging out and relaxing on days off. But, Matt, he worked, graveyard shifts. As deputy sheriffs, they also wore kind of a corner hat. And so anytime there was a death, whether it be at a hospital or at someone's home, a deputy sheriff had to respond to basically conduct an investigation to ensure there's no foul play and that it was someone who passed away of natural causes. And Matt was, I guess, doing a lot of these. I remember him saying he was doing, 2 or 3 a night during his shift, which if you think about all the hours law enforcement or all the days a law enforcement officer works, over, 1 week, that adds up pretty quickly of a lot of just death and dealing with a lot of death. And so, he never really went into detail as to, how much it was bothering him. He just, I remember him talking about that. I'm seeing a lot of this kind of thing. And again, on days off, he was doing a lot of drinking, and he wasn't, which is common for now looking back now. I just came off of graveyards. I came to day shift. But when you're on graveyards, obviously it's not natural or normal to sleep during the day and be up all night kind of thing. So your body has a tendency to fight that. And so he wasn't doing a lot of sleeping. But again, here's this young guy in his 20s. He's in his prime. He's kind of stud-like. He's a cop, and he's just kind of out having a good time and having fun. And the reason Matt had moved in with me, he had a fiance and things were kind of rocky. And so they kind of were taking a break still together, but we're not living together. And so he came to live with me and we went back to the roommate thing. With a lot of drinking, and which is a very common thing in law enforcement, especially knowing what I know now. Matt, he would go out, he would hang out with his buddies, and not even Matt. I told everybody this. If you're somewhere and you're drinking, obviously a DUI is detrimental to anybody, but and the fact that you could kill somebody or yourself just because, we think we're fine and we're not, kind of thing. So my message to not just him, to everybody, was, I don't care, what time it is. If you need a ride, call me. I'll come get you. Let's fast forward to August 8th, 2006. About, I don't know, 3:00 in the morning, I get woke up and Matt calls and says, I'm driving home. I think I've had too much to drink. So I met him in Modesto. I picked him up. I brought him home. And he didn't seem like really drunk or anything, but, he'd been drinking. He made the right decision. And in this car ride, I remember, showed me a text message on his phone to his fiance. And, it basically just said that, I think we're done, we're through. And, I think he asked her for the ring back, kind of thing. And, these things happen. Sometimes, people go through multiple engagements until they find the right one. So, he didn't seem too broken up about it or anything. And of course I apologized. I said, well, I got to go back to bed because I got to get up in the morning, go to work. You're a graveyard guy. So, we got home. Good night. I went to bed. I woke up to what I would describe as if you were to take your hand and you slapped like your thigh or your leg, like skin to skin, makes that kind of slap sound. That was the sound I heard. It sat me straight up in my bed, and it didn't sound like a gunshot. Didn't know what it was. And mind you, I'm living in a house with two other guys, one who's a law enforcement officer. I hear the sound, and then about 10 seconds later, another one goes off. So our bedroom doors made real distinct sounds. If they opened, even if I was in the master bedroom and they had the two regular rooms that were divided by a wall. And if their bedroom doors opened, even with my bedroom door shut, I knew their doors opened because of the sound it made. Well, neither one of their doors opened. And so I remember I got up, I looked out the window, and I thought, did a transformer blow? What was that? But it was quiet. And so I convinced myself that I don't know what I'm hearing, and I went back to bed. So the next morning, the other roommate left an hour before I did. I'm driving to work, and this is back when you can talk on a cell phone legally. And I call him and I said, hey, I had to borrow his car because I was on call that night and I had the city work truck in my garage. So thanking him about this. And so then he asked me, he goes, did you hear those or hear that noise last night? I said, yeah, I just thought I was hearing things because neither one of you came out. And so it was, keep in mind, their rooms were divided by a wall. He had said, well, I woke up and I heard the sound of like Matt, like grunting. I didn't know if he was throwing up or whatever. He goes, and then I don't know if he fell out of his bed. He goes, but I heard that sound. He goes, and then it went quiet, like something maybe hit the wall. Well, it turns out later on that the round that went through Matt literally hit the wall that separates the two of them. So that's probably the thud he felt, and then it went quiet. He goes, it could even been a small gun. I just knew at that point something was wrong. So I called the neighbor and I said, I need you to go check on Matt, which, in hindsight, is probably not a good idea. You don't want to send someone into a house where a cop is in there sleeping and they're probably going to be afraid they're being burglarized, kind of thing. But the neighbor knew Matt. So that, long story short, the neighbor makes his way into my house, makes his way to Matt's room and finds him dead of self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Where this kind of takes a turn and probably added to some issues I had later on was, let's keep in mind, Matt was a police officer. Here I was aspiring to be a police officer. At that point in my career and time and life, I had no need to carry a gun. However, I had just purchased a off-duty firearm from Matt probably about a month before, and he hadn't repurchased a new one for himself. Well, what a lot of people don't realize about cops is anytime they go to school, even though it could be a school where they're sitting inside of a classroom all day long, they have to have a gun on their side. It just comes with the territory, like, oh, we're going to school and we want to have a gun for our, professional attire, kind of thing. Because he had sold me this gun and hadn't replaced his own, he had asked me if he could borrow that gun. I didn't think nothing of it. He was a law enforcement officer. So that firearm was what he used to take his own life. So when this got investigated, of course, you run serial numbers and whatnot, and now the gun is registered to me. And so I was taken to the police department where I was interviewed for many, many hours, interrogated, I had to tell the story over and over and over again to make sure that, I was not involved any way, shape, or form. I wasn't a police officer, didn't have a lot of training, so didn't really realize the severity of what was going on. My hands were even checked for gunshot residue. They want to make sure I was not involved in this any way, shape, or form kind of thing. At this point, I was on the wrong side of the table, and for nothing I did at all. And still dealing with the shock of what had happened. That portion of him being gone and dead, it hadn't really, hit me yet. After many hours, at least 4 hours, I would say I was finally released, and I don't want to say released. I was never in custody, but just basically, said, okay, you can go kind of thing. And when we were done interviewing, who was in the room was a police chaplain from police department, a acting captain, and my direct supervisor. And so they were there for moral support. Of course, they said, take the day off kind of thing. You can have the day off kind of thing, which was good. Things unfolded. Obviously, we went through the whole, Matt's funeral and everything. And then this is my childhood grandparents' home. Tried to go back that night to go home, and I couldn't. I was fine as long as the sun was in the sky. But when the sun went down, I started having, severe problems. And it started with that day that I didn't recognize. So long story short, I ended up never going and staying in that house ever again. I just couldn't do it. In fact, my family moved me out of that house because I didn't want to be there. It just had a bad feeling to it, and it gave me anxiety being there, that anxiety I didn't recognize or realize was happening. And so she's now my wife, but girlfriend at the time, we moved into a 2-story home. And like I said, I was an animal control officer. She was a dispatcher at the time. So I worked primarily day shift. She worked a swing shift back then. So she worked 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. And so as time evolved, it got to the point where, and here I am, early 20s. My fears of the dark and the boogeyman have been gone for a long time. But all of a sudden, I got to the point where I could not go upstairs anymore without her home. I was fearful that I would be upstairs, be there alone, and someone would come in the door and I'd be trapped upstairs. So, I would literally be on the couch, would not leave the living room. I had everything I needed right there until she came home, and then we'd go upstairs together. It didn't dawn on me what was happening. Another thing that happened was, again, you go to bed at night, all calm. It's supposed to be all good in the world. I'm supposed to calm and go to sleep and relax. This is where I can let my guard down. Well, that's when my anxiety would shoot up. And I'm guessing it's probably because of it happened at nighttime, the incident with Matt. But I remember vividly us laying in bed one night and trying to go to sleep, and my heart starts racing. And I sit up and I said, what are we going to do if the stairs catches on fire? How are we going to get out of this house? We need ladders to go out the windows. Those kinds of things. I was going through, my crazy, if you will. Didn't realize that I was suffering from something.
You're sharing your story. Your story starts out, Michael, with Matt's story and transitions into yours. It sounds like what you're talking about now is where you realized something's up. Something is just not quite right.
Correct.
Okay. So share a little bit more then about that for you.
So I'm having these symptoms. I'm getting to the point I'm basically scared of my own shadow, scared of the dark. I'm having fears that are not really logical. With the stairs catching on fire. That's something someone normally worries about. Combined with these symptoms, I was having intestinal issues. Not to get too graphic, but anything I ate, I had to be near a restroom within probably 5 minutes. And because it was, literally it was going straight through me. Nothing was staying with me. Eat or drink within 5 minutes. I had to be near a restroom kind of thing. And I began taking, like over-the-counter medicine, trying to resolve those issues. And none of it, didn't touch it. It just continued happening. And so again, over the course of a couple months, this kept happening. Finally, and I think that I tried to avoid it, just thinking, I have a stomach bug, or I had excuses for it. And the anxiety portion of it, I don't think that it didn't really all come to a head until finally I had passed some blood, and I ended up going to see my own family physician, regular doctor. And, they ran all kinds of tests on me. Well, colon cancer, it runs in my family. And so I think I kind of convinced myself that I've got it's just my turn. I've got colon cancer. And so that's why I'm having these problems. At this point in my life, I didn't have any real training. In law enforcement in the academy, you get like a minor, 4-hour block of mental health training, which, knowing what I know now, is not enough at all. But at that point, I hadn't had that really. What I didn't recognize what I was going through as a mental health issue. To me, it was all medical related. So for me, knowing of my family history, I was like, well, this is probably what's going on. Went to my doctor, again, with the passing of the blood, ran all kinds of tests on me. Everything comes back completely normal. There's nothing wrong with you. He's telling me, well, there's something wrong, and so, he goes through a list of, problems, common things. Have you been out of the country lately? Have you eaten anything odd lately? No, and then finally it was a matter, he asked the question. It was like, it was his final question. It was, has anything traumatic happened in your life lately? And this is a regular family physician, your family doctor, who's been my doctor since I was like 5. And he's my stepfather, but I call him my dad. He was with me, Larry. I kind of got quiet, and Larry, my dad, told him, well, his best friend just shot and killed himself in his home a couple months ago. And so immediately the doctor was like, that's the problem. And that's when I got the diagnosis of the PTSD. So, the first thing he said is, well, you need to go talk to somebody. You need to, and again, I was aspiring to be a police officer, and knowing that part of a background process for a police officer is you have to go through a psychological evaluation. Those are things you got to disclose. So if here I am talking to a professional psychologist, I'm gonna have to disclose that. So, okay, well maybe I should give you some medication. So again, because it was for that purpose, I turned that down as well. I said, no, I can't do that, because again, I would have to disclose that. So he says, well, you have to do something. You need to talk to somebody. So he, of all people, goes, well, is there anybody at your department you can talk to? Is there a chaplain? And as soon as he said that, I remembered back on the day it happened. And in that room was a chaplain. And so knowing that chaplain had intimate details as to what had occurred, and so I didn't have to explain this to a new person. And so someone who had a little background, I went to him. I thank God every day for that man. He saved my life. And it's just the God honest truth. I went to him and I said, I'm having these issues. I get choked up, sorry.
Take your time. Take your time. I think if, from a mental health clinician's point of view, the fact that you can even talk about this, we recognize that it's not that simple. So we recognize that the impact of reliving this is monumental. So you take your time. And
so I went to him and I said, I'm having these issues, and I can't sleep. I have anxiety. I'm, what else? Just kind of everything. I'm scared of the dark. I'm a grown man, basically. I'm having these just, things that aren't logical happening. And, I was told that I have this. And so I need to talk to somebody. So, many mornings we had breakfast a lot. So, a side note, kind of a funny thing is, I've always been a little bit of a chubby guy. And even before this, what do we, what does someone do who is seeking comfort? We go eat, we comfort food, kind of thing. So,
oh yeah, I understand that one.
love to eat. Let's eat something to make ourselves feel better. So, ironically, before morning or work, we would go and have breakfast, and I would tell the story over and over again. And after a few months, I really started feeling better. Symptoms started going away. I don't want to say go away, but really subsiding. It was like, okay, I'm getting back to a quality of life. I'm starting to function like a normal person. So I realized at that point, it's like, so the only way through this dark, long tunnel is to talk about it. You have to talk about it. You have to acknowledge it. And, again, I wasn't a cop at the time, but because I knew what field I was getting into, and I know what my expectation was of a law enforcement officer from the outside looking in. And I know what people today look at cops and think they should be robotic, they should be emotionless, they should be, emotionally bulletproof is what they should be. They should be able to see anything and everything, deal with whatever, and not be impacted by it. That is what society expects. That's what we expect of one another. I think almost, maybe not intentionally, but that's what happens. And so we have an expectation of ourselves to be, the tough guy. Be, we're gonna deal with whatever, and that's where we go wrong. That's where what impacted me happened before I was ever a police officer. But to know the things I've even seen as a police officer, there's been many times, we are highly trained. We go to work and we see the worst of the worst. We see negative things, and our training just kicks in. It kicks in. We handle the situation. For B, if I have got something that has impacted me deeply, my wife is my sounding board. She was my support back then when she was just my girlfriend. She stuck to the crazy. If it wasn't, like I said, if it wasn't for her who stayed by my side, and Dave, the chaplain, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. The two of them is what got me through it. But you look at, first responders. There are a lot of first responders out there that they don't have a good support system. They go home to nobody. And so what you see statistically is and then I didn't realize it again, we're going back to Matt. He was doing a lot of drinking. What I see now and realize now is that is a form of self-medication. They're self-medicating themselves, overcome something that they're dealing with. Whether they know it or not, there's something there bothering them. It's very high that statistically that substance abuse, you would think cops, substance abuse, no, or even first responders for that matter. It happens. They're trying to overcome something. Promiscuity. That's another thing is, it's a very high statistic. They're looking for a pleasure, something which is all temporary. None of it is a permanent fix, but they're trying to overcome something usually. Like I said, whether they know it or not.
Trying to manage and overcome all of the worst of the worst that you just described, everything that you guys see on a daily basis and are expected to not have an emotional reaction to, and so shove it down. Like you said, finding other ways to mask it or try to cope with it. And it may not always be the healthiest coping mechanisms. Right.
Because at the end of the day, who wants to raise their hand and say, I'm having a problem, I need to talk to somebody. I'm suffering from this, that, or the other. They don't do it. They don't want to do it. They're afraid to do it because they're afraid they're going to look weak. They're afraid they're going to be judged by their counterparts and their admin, their supervisors. They're afraid that the public is going to view them as weak, who expects them to be strong and tough. So when you go up against all those things, you feel like I don't have a choice but to internalize this. And the only choice I have is to, is just to deal with it myself, kind of thing. Going back to, sorry, I'm going off on my tangent now.
So here at Therapists Uncut, we have this thing called Squirrel So Hard. And that's because I am very easily distracted by shiny squirrels all the time. And so, no, you're in the perfect place to tangent here.
So going back to, the symptoms and talking to Dave, I started feeling better. And to this day, I'm very close to Dave. In fact, he married my wife and I. So we're very close. Since then, here we are, 14 years later, then, like Jillian and I, we've known each other for many years, raised in the church, someone would question their faith and say, why would God put me through this? Why would I go through this? Now I realize, he doesn't put us through something that he's not going to bring us through the other side. I truly believe that. And he's given me a story that's now I've been through something, I've made it through something, and there's others going through the same thing. And they need to hear that this is possible to get through. This is something you can survive.
So it seems like you've embarked on a new journey to share your story, which will continue to help you and hopefully help the community change some myths about law enforcement and mental health. What are your goals and dreams for sharing your story like this? And Matt's. I want to make sure that we honor the fact that this is Matt's story too. Thank you so much for joining us for part 1 of Michael Shaw's interview as he continues to share how Michael is transitioning to use his story. Tune in next week for part 2.
Thank you for joining Therapists Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapists Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapists Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapists Uncut.